Good evening, and welcome to Glastonbury Abbey. My name is Ellie Devine. I'm a member of the extended community here at the Abbey, and I am delighted to welcome you to the third and final presentation of Father Thomas Massaro's three-part series on social action and the Catholic Church and Pope Francis. Father Massaro is professor of moral theology at Fordham University. We also found out he's a lover of Italian desserts as well, so he's in good stead with us tonight. He has written any number of books, I think 9 or 10 or 11, maybe up to 13 now, Father. The latest is Mercy in Action, and then we've got 2 more coming out. We don't, he does. Living Justice and Pope Francis as Moral Leader. And I believe those are coming out in October.
They're my twins.
To be delivered in a day or so. Tonight, Father Massaro will speak on how Pope Francis updates his message on social concern. Father Massaro, with all you've got going on, I am delighted and amazed that you have time for us tonight. So I'm going to step aside and give you the floor. Welcome.
Good. Well, it's great to be with the group once again. I understand that the number of participants in tonight's webinar is the highest yet. So that's good. And that's a good reason to run through a very quick review, probably 5 minutes, of what we did in the first 2 sessions of this 3-part webinar. So let's go to that review, get you up to speed. And all of these themes, we're going to look at 10 themes, 6 here and 4 in just a second. All of those themes will appear again tonight. It's like a recurring cycle. So we'll see how Pope Francis advances, or you could say renews, the Catholic social teaching tradition in the 10 years of his pontificate. So let's see what that tradition consisted of. On the screen right now, and by the way, you can make that screen larger or smaller by putting your cursor on the boundary between that slide and my visage here, and you can slide it, tap your mouse down, your cursor down, and you can slide it left to make my face bigger or right to make the slides bigger. Not just this one, but all the slides. We've got some nice photos coming up too. So what were those 6 foundational themes that we treated in the first section, September 12th, our first webinar? Well, first we opened with the more, I would say, individualistic side of it, about people in their individual rights and dignity. And that's the first one: dignity of every human person and the human rights that adhere with each person. And the Catholic Church was a bit latecomer to this message of human rights, whereas the French Revolution in 1790 had a document on human rights, and the Rights of Man, it was called. And then the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. It took 25 more years, or 15 more years, for the Church to have what we call the Catholic Charter of Human Rights. And that was Pope John the 23rd's great social encyclical, Pacem in Terris, Peace on Earth, where he enumerated a long list of rights. And it's not just a random laundry list. It really was an ordered, tiered group of rights, from the most important to more peripheral ones. So that's the beginning. The first theme is an individual dignity and rights, and it's complemented very nice by theme number 2, B on your slide there, solidarity, which means that we all are in this together and we have a common set of obligations, relationships. We're like in a network or a web of human life. And if one person is endangered or diminished or lost, we are all worse off because of that. We're all poor. And so we support one another. That word solidarity is a wonderful, more than just a slogan. It was a slogan of the French Revolution. It really is an integral part of Catholic social doctrine, and really the entire social theory that our church, I think of the great scholars like Thomas Aquinas, talked about society borrowing from Aristotle, the Greek philosopher 2,000 years earlier, talking about our mutual benefits that are so important to contribute, to even make sacrifices, things like paying taxes, that makes the community stronger. And the third part there, participation. Everyone has a right to a voice and to participate in the economy and in politics. The third theme is family life. I'm going to talk about it tonight in great depth, so I won't say any more about it now, but it's been a constant part of Catholic social teaching since its very beginning in the 19th century, the importance of family life. The fourth item there, you see the D, is a fancy word, subsidiarity, which simply means that all of the levels of society, whether that's local, municipal, regional, state, regional, national, and international, global, all of the levels are supposed to help each other. Subsidiarity comes from the Latin word subsidium, for assistance. So a sense that all parts of society work together, help each other, assist each other, and there's a proper role for government in this very complex equation. Not to say that everything has to be a governmental, controlled by a centralized government, not at all. But when a coordinating mechanism like a federal government or a state government can make society better, can serve the common good, then we should delegate tasks to that government. But of course, it's great to have local, in some ways it's preferable to have local solutions to problems. It's a balance. And if anyone goes too far towards centralization, too much government, or decentralization, too little government to help us, then we're probably doing something wrong. It's all about the balance, subsidiarity. The fifth theme, the E level there, is about property, one of the most important institutions that humanity has come up with. Property ownership is part of natural law. We believe that it's congruent with the way that God wanted the world to exist. God gave us the world in common, but it's very appropriate. It's very convenient. It's very it's just good that people have private property. They enjoy the fruits of their labor. They can call their land or their intellectual property their own. And that they also, so you see the final phrase, rights and responsibilities. They have a right to private property, but they also have responsibilities. With great amounts of property and wealth come responsibilities to care for the community. And if anyone is monopolizing, especially land or productive capabilities, I think of factories and capital and investments, if it gets skewed out of proportion, then something has to give, that we have to be more generous and maybe even have structures like progressive taxation that just redistribute the property so that it serves humanity. We will see lots more of this when we do the first theme of Pope Francis about 5 minutes from now or less. And the final of those 6 foundational themes that we did in the first session, September 12th, is about work, human labor. And we spend about a third of our lives, if you're a workaholic like me, more than a third of your life, in the workplace, doing work of some sort. And whether it's blue collar work, or it's more physical labor, strong back, or whether it's white collar work like intellectual work in a university. I work for Fordham University, or maybe you're a writer, or you work in any number of administrative things. And by the way, I like the phrase, there are black collar work. I'm wearing one of those black collars. So cleric, the work of religious clerics. And there used to be a category, I don't think I like this category very much, pink collar work, referred to the work that was traditionally, maybe these are gender-laden attachments that should be connections that should be left behind, but pink collar work, the typical professions that women did back in the day. Now I'd like to think our professions are open to all people. So dignity of work, the rights of workers to a dignified wage, or a living wage, and to good working conditions, reasonable hours, expectations, labor contracts, and then support for labor unions. We've seen a lot of strikes, the Writers Guild and the Actors Guild, and now the automobile manufacturers, number of other times when labor actions are necessary to balance the scales of who has the most power in our industrial society. Now, it can't just be that the workers and the managers and the investors, the stock shareholders, control everything, dictate wage levels and everything else to the workers. It's important to have labor unions. every pope since the 1890s have recognized the importance of labor unions, and that includes Pope Francis, and we have a whole unit on that coming up. So, Bria, let's go to the next slide. Then on September 19th, last Tuesday, we looked at 4 additional themes of Catholic social teaching. While those first 6 were foundational, they've been here from the very beginning, 1891 or so, these 4 developed over time. These 4 themes crept their way into the documents of Catholic social teaching, the dozen or so social encyclicals of popes, and the other documents from bishops, or the Second Vatican Council. That great document, Gaudium et Spes, has lots of social teaching. So what are these 4? Well, the first one there is about economic development, and it was only really in the 1960s, more or less, that popes started talking about global economic development. What are the patterns by which industrialization rolls out, unfolds? In fact, the Spanish word for development, desarrollo, you see the word roll in there, an unrolling of the economy from less complicated, maybe agricultural, to more complex and sophisticated, with a lot of moving parts and a lot of trade. And when you buy something like a cell phone or an automobile, there are thousands of parts in these complex machines, and they may come from dozens of different countries with complex supply lines. Many people contribute to a complex industrial product that rolls off an assembly line. So economic development is a question of who gets to produce manufactured goods, at what prices, what are the relative commodity prices? Does one country take advantage of a less developed country in this process? Short answer is yes, by the way. It's a terrible endemic problem of our economic system, where commodity prices and worker shares and worker wages are not fair, or certainly not uniform across the globe. And there are groups that are privileged and other groups that are exploited. It's no coincidence that the word colonialism appears there in this 7th theme, the A level on your page right now. All of the inequities, the inequalities of the world, of the globalized world economy today, are largely traced to the colonial era, when there was a French empire and a British empire that controlled, I don't know, a quarter of the world, including big countries like India. There was a Portuguese empire with holdings in Africa and Asia and the New World. Spanish, of course, colonized much of Latin America. So those colonial powers with domination, both military, economic, even it was the way that missionaries, religious messages were spread as well. Those structures of colonialism from the great empires of the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th centuries were very much a part of building the world as we have it, and they have left a legacy of real inequity, where some countries are greatly disadvantaged, and millions of people are underpaid. And you know the story of sweatshops that produce goods, whether they're clothing or manufactured goods, where the workers are paid and very poorly and treated even worse. The second level there is peace and disarmament. Only a few of the encyclicals, I mentioned Pacem in Terris from John the 23rd in 1963, and we'll talk about Pope Francis's contributions to our reflection on how to establish peace, how to keep the peace, how to build conditions. We call that peace building. And the importance of disarmament, turning away from weapons and putting our resources into productive things that actually help people, not kill people. Those themes are only in a few of the encyclicals, but I will talk about them. It's one of our 6 themes for later tonight. Then we talked about the option for the poor and vulnerable. And I think I said last Tuesday that we owe a great debt of gratitude to Latin America, because it's the liberation theologians from Latin America. I think I held up a copy of the original, kind of like the original Bible charter of Latin American liberation theology, called A Theology of Liberation by Gustavo Gutierrez, a Peruvian priest who wrote it in the early 1970s. And it stated the importance of making a preferential option for the poor. people who are vulnerable, people who have been discriminated against, people for whom the structures of the international economy, farming practices and trade practices, international globalization have harmed them by and large, limited their economic opportunities. And I hope I made the point clearly last week, I think I did, that this doesn't mean that the church, if it adopts a preferential option for the poor and vulnerable, it doesn't mean that the church doesn't care for people who are affluent or comfortable middle class. Or the United States culture is more of a middle class culture, whereas the Latin American cultures are sharply divided between a peasant or campesino class and an upper tier, or just a few families that control so much of the wealth and even the land of many Central and South American countries. It's not that the rich aren't worthy of the church's spiritual care or we should ignore them, but rather that the people who need the most attention are the ones that we should lavish our attention, care, solicitude upon them, to give them every opportunity to lift up the poor. That was a message associated with Jesus of Nazareth. And the Catholic Church, whether we're in the 21st century or further back, has an obligation to lift up the poor and to make a special effort. And I think I made this analogy that if you had, say, 3 children and one of them needed special medical care, you would make a preferential option for that child, maybe making more sacrifices, more trips to the clinics or hospitals or doctors than the other 2 who are in good shape and don't need that much attention. Is to lift up the poor. It's not a matter of punishing the affluent. They deserve spiritual care as well. And the 10th theme that we covered by way of review here is care for ecology, the natural environment, what Pope Francis calls our common home. We've got an entire unit on that coming up. It's the 3rd of our 6 themes, so we'll defer treatment until we get to Pope Francis's Laudato Si. Okay, so let's move to the next slide. I think we've done well. And at the end of last time, I had just enough extra time to squeeze in what I call bonus material. No additional charge for this user's guide to Catholic social teaching. And the reason I inserted this last week is I don't want to give the impression that Catholic social teaching, it's 10 themes, you could probably list more themes, but the 10 that I identified, that it's all abstract principles. Actually, it needs to be put into practice. It needs to be applied. We need to implement the messages of these social encyclicals and other documents. And so over the years, I've just compiled this. This is my short list. I have a longer list, but and here's what I said. All of these 5 items, a user's guide to Catholic social teaching, how to use it, how to enact it. Each of them is a matter of balancing things, and they're all good things too. So the first one is to recognize that there's a place for the church in public life. We don't just have a private church, it's a public faith, public theology, public church. But also to recognize that there are things that are reserved to governments, to state. So the balance of church and state is a very delicate balance. Every country has its own constitution and way of delimiting the power of the church, or any religion, not just the Catholic Church. And in our country, we have the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which I'll read you the 17 words. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, that's the no establishment clause, nor restricting the free exercise thereof. So we can practice our religion, that's the free exercise clause, but we also have no establishment. So we can't have an established church that gets all kinds of extra favors and privileges as opposed to other religions. So that's the first one. The second user's guide point, to acknowledge the tension between private and public. Private dimensions of faith, your spiritual life, things that you would talk within your faith community about, maybe in church or in Bible study group or at a retreat house, but also public church. So we have an obligation to make our faith a public thing. We're not ashamed of our faith. We bring our faith beliefs into public life. Now, whether a senator should go down to the well of the Senate and give a speech and talk about his or her Marian devotion and piety, sacraments, that may be going too far. It may not sell actually very well, because a majority of Congress, as a majority of the country, is not Catholic, and only 22 or 23% are Catholic. So we carefully, with prudence, decide when to share parts of our faith. But the parts about social justice are worth sharing even to a pluralistic audience. So that's a balance. The third balance there is between the two extreme interpretations. Don't imagine that Catholic social teaching is a blueprint of solutions, technical solutions to every problem that can ever come up. By the way, popes who give these documents, who publish these documents in Rome, they don't know anything about the US economy. They're talking in general terms with good advisors, by the way, economists, people trained in all of the social sciences, to have good advice, but they're not pretending to apply that advice to every nation on earth. There's 192 nations. There's no way that they could utter a word that has application to every environment. But at the other side, the other extreme is there are some people who just say, oh, well, Catholic social teaching, it's too vague. It couldn't possibly apply here. That would be saying that the teaching of our church on social issues, on justice and peace, is endlessly malleable. You could hammer it into any shape you want, and it really doesn't really have a life of its own. There's no there. That's not true either. There are some firm principles that we need to recognize and to acknowledge and to try to apply. Again, they're broad principles, but they seek application in every situation. My fourth one is to simply balance these two values. Once again, it's a both and, both respect for the individual, it's the individual side, and a very high regard for the common good, the community, the communal well-being, things that we share in common. And that was our theme of the common good and solidarity. And finally, my user's guide ends with recognizing this both and, the status of Catholic social teaching as something that we inherit. It's been passed on to us by great minds in previous generations, centuries, even millennia, great theologians from way back, Augustine and Aquinas and many others. It's an inherited tradition, but it also has a growing edge. It's not a museum piece collecting dust or under glass in a museum. It has a growing edge. It's meant to grow. It's meant to encounter new themes, rise up to new challenges, and the balance of what I'm going to say tonight about Pope Francis is about how our current Pope, in his 10 years plus in office now, has met new challenges, allowing Catholic social teaching to kind of grow, not to disrupt it, and not to disqualify anything or disavow anything that happened a long time ago, but rather to allow the old lessons to meet the new times. And we're going to see some of the global crises, like the refugee crisis, the climate change crisis, crisis of inequality, how all of these are met by Pope Francis. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that list. Let's move forward. We've done all of our review, and now we're ready for Pope Francis material, the new stuff. So looking ahead over the next 50 minutes or so, I will talk about the renewal of Catholic social teaching by Pope Francis in these 6 ways. So economic equality, we'll talk about social justice in the economic sense. Secondly, we'll talk specifically about worker justice, how Pope Francis has addressed that theme of the dignity of workers, and what are the conditions that will help them thrive and be treated justly in the workplace. Third, we'll talk about the environment. The key there is the Laudato Si encyclical from 2015. Fourth, we will talk about family life, and we'll talk about his apostolic exhortation, Amoris Laetitia, on love in the family. It's coming up. And then the fifth theme is, I think it's especially close to his heart, concern for refugees. So those who are displaced from their homeland, how he has treated them, talked about them, and really challenged world leaders, many of whom are kind of nativist or anti-migration, to be more generous, more welcoming. And the sixth and final theme is about peacemaking, what he said about war and peace. I'll talk about the just war theory. Maybe the Ukraine war will be an example we can use, and I'll mention some documents. So in each of these categories, we have a photo, and Bria, we're going to go to the first photo now. So we're introducing economic inequality. Okay, so there it is. There is the book that when I see this cover, and it's a book written by an acquaintance of mine, Raphael Luciani. He's a theologian now at Boston College, although he originated in Venezuela, and he wound up at Boston College. I actually worked at Boston College for some years. He wrote this book, it's just about 6 years old now, Pope Francis and the Theology of the People. And it's a great book, and it does. I will talk briefly about what the theology of the people is. It's a variant of liberation theology from Argentina. But I hope you can recognize in that photo the face of a probably 60-year-old future Pope Francis. He was still the Cardinal Archbishop of Buenos Aires, Argentina, when this photo was taken. Now, I've never been to Argentina, much less Buenos Aires. I haven't ridden the public transportation, but I suspect he's on a trolley or subway, whatever they have down there. And he used to ride public transportation. And isn't it noteworthy that the people around him, obviously from different walks of life, from their clothes, they didn't think much of this. They were used to the idea of this Cardinal Archbishop, Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio, again, probably in his 60s, maybe as old as 70 in this photo. He was elected Pope at the age of 76, going around just riding public transportation. I've lived in a number of cities where there are cardinals, and we've had great in New York. We have Cardinal Dolan. I'm very friendly with him. When I lived in Boston for 20 years, most of those years, we had Cardinal Sean Patrick O'Malley still there, right? They were great guys. I would see them in rectories. I would see them at lectures and in cathedrals, but I never saw them riding public transportation. So I wanted to start with that photo of Pope Francis and the theology of the people. Again, I'll get back to that title. Here's my copy of the book. I think this was taken from my copy. So, okay, so let's get into what it is that Pope Francis was saying about the economy. And so that's the economic inequality. So where do we start? First of all, I just want to say that Pope Francis has published no major treatises or even encyclicals that are strictly economics, okay? His writings on the economy, his comments about economic justice and addressing inequality are scattered in many different places where he addressed larger issues of social order, including the place of the church as an evangelizer of culture. Okay, what that means is that we are called, anybody in the church is called to spread the gospel. That's the root word of evangelization. And in order to do this, we look for what is it that society needs? Certainly it needs the saving message of our Lord Jesus Christ, his message of salvation from our sins, his offer of redemption for our sins, but it also needs help in creating conditions where people are treated decently. And if the economy is greatly unjust, unequal, unequitable, then the conditions for evangelization are not what they should be. His first major document, I'm going to hold this up. And again, if you want to, you can make my side of the slide larger and make the Theology of the People book a little bit smaller. Move your cursor. This is a cover of his first major writing. It's not an encyclical, it's an apostolic exhortation, and it's called Evangelii Gaudium, the joy of the gospel. And in this very long, it's I don't know, 180 pages in my version. It's a very long document, about 40,000 words. In the pages of this, on several different points, he circles back. He's talking about evangelization, the joy of the gospel, how to spread the gospel. He even has things about techniques of evangelization. But in the pages of this, every once in a while, he circles back to the conditions that treat people poorly. How can we create a society where people have a decent chance to have economic opportunity, have a decent life, and not be oppressed by the structures of the economy? He's not a highly abstract thinker. He hardly ever uses the word capitalism or socialism. He's not interested in big isms and systems and ideologies. Actually, he's spoken many times saying that ideologies are not important, not nearly as important as the concrete people. People are the focus of evangelization, not systems. But we cannot ignore the economy because it shapes the lives of every person. So I'm going to just mention two sound bites. Again, they're from this Joy of the Gospel, Evangelii Gaudium, his first major document published in November of 2013. So he was Pope for about 7 months when he put out this great teaching document. In paragraph 53 of this document, he reflects on the fact that we have a commandment To safeguard the value of human life, these are direct words now, quoting, today we have to say that thou shalt not kill in an economy of exclusion and inequality. Such an economy kills. Those are very strong words from any pope, but you could tell that Pope Francis has thought a great deal about what our economy does when it excludes, when it treats people as marginalized, and it's an unfair economy. Two Italian journalists put together a book. It was just about the next year. I think it was 2014. And if you could see my picture here, I'm trying to hold it up as big as possible. This economy kills. And these two Italian theologians analyzed Evangelii Gaudium, the joy of the gospel. They actually have an interview with Pope Francis. They got a one-on-one, two-on-one interview with him. This is Tornielli and Galeazzi are the names of the economists. There they are. Andrea Tornicelli is the more famous one, Tornielli. And did you notice the photo here? I have never seen a photo of Pope Francis looking quite so sour and unhappy. I don't know who took the photo. Maybe it was during that interview when they had him two-on-one in an interview room. But he was clearly reflecting on something distasteful. And I suspect, again, the topic was the economy, that the economy, when he was thinking about how it excludes people from opportunity, it pays workers so poorly, that's when he made that sourpuss of a face, which I thought was pretty telling, because you don't often see Pope Francis looking that unhappy. I'll have to get my next book here. Okay, so we've done well with those. So a few more comments on economic inequality. The economy can be good news for the poor if we are able to reshape it away from the negative things towards the positive things. So as you know, Pope Francis is always upbeat, optimistic, hopeful. He's always holding out hope that whatever is wrong with the world can be reversed if we only muster some of the will, the political will, the social will to change things. That sometimes involves sacrifice on the part of those with a lot of power, a lot of resources to benefit those who have less resources. He states that what we need to overcome is, and I love this phrase, the idolatry of money. We worship money. In the United States, we say the almighty dollar. And I'm sure in Europe, it's the euro, or in Argentina, it was the peso, whatever. When we put too much emphasis on accumulating wealth, then we are not, oriented towards the proper values. A couple of other phrases that he uses, I'll just mention them briefly. One is trickle-down economics. Now, popes very rarely even use any phrases about economic theory. But here he says there is a theory of trickle-down economics, is in that same paragraph 53, that needs to be disavowed, because it's never been proven that giving more money, like tax breaks to the people at the very top, the top 1%, with the hope that the benefits will trickle down, maybe they'll hire some more factory workers in their factories, has not been proven to really work. And so he's advocating to question trickle-down economics. Again, that's about as specific as any pope has gotten on economic theory. Another phrase he uses is welfare projects. In our country, the United States, the word welfare has somehow gotten a bad name. I think it's associated with people who cheat the welfare system, which is a terrible misuse of language. Welfare is a very positive word. It should be welcomed. Anytime that we can do anything to increase, welfare just means well-being. It's a neutral or positive word, not a negative word about slackers or dependency, exaggerated and extending dependency. So Pope Francis says, yes, there's a time for welfare projects, keeping people simply alive, people who are outside the job market, have no, maybe they have childcare duties, they're not really likely to be able to work, at least in the near term. So keep them alive with, whatever resources they need. In our country, we have food stamps, or we call them SNAP benefits. We have housing vouchers. We have all kind of health care, Medicaid for the low-income people. But those are charitable works, and charity is good. But as I've said a couple of times in the series, justice. So we need to complement or supplement charitable giving, whether from the government or private agencies like the church agencies, Catholic Charities, St. Vincent de Paul societies. Those are good. but they're not likely to pay all the bills of those in need. And so we also need to open up opportunities. This is a matter of social justice. So he says these things in Evangelii Gaudium. And there's one other point, and this is where we talk about inequality head on. In paragraph 202, again, of this great, his first great document, long teaching document, The Joy of the Gospel, Evangelii Gaudium, he says, inequality is the root of social ills. So inequality is the root of so many social problems, and it's because it creates a great inequality, pay differentials, wealth gaps, that creates a social situation that is really like a downward spiral. It keeps society from being unified, from being fair. Behind all of these judgments that Pope Francis shares with us, which are very similar to the judgments of previous popes like John Paul II, and especially for Pope Paul VI with his great encyclical Populorum Progressio in 1967, he's in continuity with those popes, but he ratchets up the challenge of economic inequality to a new level. And because as we know, inequality is growing. Do you recall in 2011 and 2012, the movement called Occupy Wall Street? I was living in Boston, so Occupy, I think it was not Park Square, but one of those squares down by State Street where all of the banks and the brokerage houses, investment companies, capital, what do they call them? Investment firms are all kept. So what was it called? It was Dewey Square, Dewey Square. So I went down to Dewey Square and I actually said a couple of masses for the protesters. They were there for months and they dispersed both at Wall Street, that's Zuccotti Park in New York, and at Dewey Square in Boston. But they made a point about the 1% taking advantage of the 99%. So Pope Francis is always pointing to the need to alleviate poverty, to end the idolatry of money, to emphasize both charity and justice. And I think I just said this briefly last time. His tool is to emphasize structural justice. So looking at the structural causes of poverty, deeply embedded patterns of trade and investment, and the way banks operate, they take advantage of poorer neighborhoods, the housing market, long-time policies of redlining poor neighborhoods so that low-income people didn't have much of a chance of getting a mortgage on favorable terms, college loans. The entire economic system seems to be weighted against the poor. And so we need structural change. And in my books, I often say that he has a structural eye. It's like a set of special glasses that he looks through to see the structures, economic and political structures that keep the poor down. And just to go back to that slide, we're just wrapping up this first of the 6 points. It's the longest of the 6 anyway, to talk about the theology of the people. So I said that liberation theology comes from Latin America. And also, it's important to realize that the Argentinian branch of liberation theology is a little different from the others, and that's called theology of the people. The starting point for Pope Francis and lots of other Argentinian theologians, some of them Jesuits, same community as me, but others, is the starting point is the devotion of the people, even popular devotions like reverence for saints, devotion to Mary, and to build on their experience of religious values and to build up economic and political values based on those. Okay, so we've done economic inequality. I could talk about this forever, you could tell. We're now going to go to the second of our 6 themes. And this is one of my favorite photos. I'll explain in just a moment. The topic of worker justice. So Pope Francis is very strong on labor justice. Maybe it comes from his experience in Argentina. Maybe it comes from many possible places, mingling with the people. He came from a middle-class family, from actually a lower middle-class neighborhood. It's called Flores in central Buenos Aires. So very much in touch with workers. As soon as he became Pope, he started a number of travels to places of great high economic distress, including the two highest unemployment regions of all of Europe. They're in the Mediterranean. One is Albania, a very small country across the Adriatic from Italy. So he made an early trip there. But the one that's on your screen was his visit to Sardinia, an island off the coast of Italy, not really far from Rome at all. And that's where bauxite, that's the mining of the ore that makes aluminum, has been the traditional biggest industry. And unfortunately, the bauxite miners who wear helmets just like that one you see over there, yellow helmets with a headlamp there, right? That they have been displaced from their jobs. Tens of thousands have been, what do the British say, made redundant, fired, furloughed, laid off. And so he deliberately went into he didn't go too deep, but he went into a bauxite mine and he linked arms with the workers, and he really made a show of his support for laid off workers. That was September of 2013. He'd only been the Pope for about 5 months when he went there to Sardinia, and then his trip to Albania. More broadly, he went to different countries in the world, and one of them was Bolivia, where there's a lot of need for land reform. And he held a meeting in Santa Cruz, Bolivia, and it was the second in a series of meetings that he started. No other pope ever had such a series of meetings, called World Meetings of Popular Movements. And in those talks, I think I might actually read a little bit of one paragraph of one of them. In those series of talks, so he had meetings in Rome, he hosted some groups, and then he went to Bolivia, and he went some other places. They were actually interrupted by the pandemic. He had a couple on Zoom and some regional meetings as well. But at those World Meeting of Popular Movements, he called together community organizers and a whole list of people, and I'll give you the list in just a second, to talk about labor justice. So here's a paragraph from the first of his addresses to the World Meetings of Popular Movements. It's about 4 sentences. And he said this: it's all about worker justice. From now on, the Pope said, every worker within the formal system of salaried employment or outside it, he's talking about black market labor, informal sector, they should all have the right to decent remuneration. That means pay, good pay, to social security and a pension, so retirement benefits. Among you here are, and he gives a list of the people that he had gathered together: waste collectors, or garbage men, recyclers, peddlers, seamstresses, tailors, artisans, fishermen, farm workers, builders, miners, workers in previously abandoned enterprises, like the bauxite miners in Sardinia, right, with his helmet, members of all kinds of cooperatives and workers in grassroots jobs. They're all excluded from labor rights, so they're not getting their labor rights. They should be. And people who are denied the possibility of unionizing, that's against Catholic social teaching, right? Whose income is neither adequate nor stable. Today, I want to join my voice to yours, and support you in your struggle. So there's a mention of solidarity without using the word. He wants to be close to these workers. He traveled halfway around the world, although it was his native continent of South America when he went to Bolivia, to deliver a message of solidarity with the workers. So I said already, globalization has hurt workers. The division of labor has progressed, but it hasn't. The workers aren't receiving the benefits. It seems like all the benefits accrue to the people in the 1%, the top of the pyramid, the investors, the managers, the owners, rather than the workers who produce so much of the value. Okay, and I just want to give you a short list of I'm going to kick off a list of other things that Pope Francis has done to show solidarity with workers. One, he has gone out to the peripheries. So I've already mentioned Sardinia, Albania, Bolivia, but many other places where people have high rates of unemployment and underemployment. A second thing he's done, he has gone out of his way to criticize companies that lay off workers. Shortly after he became Pope, the media conglomerate called Sky Italy, it's big TV, it owns TV stations and video outlets and things, laid off a whole bunch of workers, and they were not negotiating in good faith with the media workers, reporters, and television crews. And so I wouldn't say he intervened, but he weighed in on that strike and said, if they have the right to strike, and if you lay off people, you have to give them more notice and treat them with value. Here's another very sad episode. This is my third of my 5 items. He He traveled all the way to Dhaka, Bangladesh. Now, it took him a few years to get there, 2019. But shortly after he became Pope in 2013, a factory there collapsed. It was called the Rama Plaza. And that factory was an 11-story building with actually several different factory textile mill facilities inside with thousands of workers. Over 1,000 workers died when the structure pancaked, it collapsed. And by the way, the owners detected cracks in the support beams well in advance. They had plenty of time to restructure the building, or at least to evacuate the building, stop using it while they bolstered or buttressed these cracked beams. And it collapsed and it killed, I think it was 1,100 workers. Pope Francis sent his very deep and heartfelt regrets to those workers. And by the way, Bangladesh is not a country with many Catholics. So it wasn't just to support the Catholic community, it was to support all workers who were mistreated in the marketplace, in the workplace, and treated with disrespect, and they're risking their lives by their the factory owners. So structural analysis, that goes for economic structures in the metaphorical sense, but actually it goes for building structures in the literal sense as well. Fourth item, he traveled to a neighborhood in Naples, and from Rome to Naples, you can get there a couple hours by car, but he wanted to visit a certain neighborhood, Scampia. It's probably the poorest neighborhood in Naples. If you like Stanley Tucci's, what is it called? Searching for Italy. It's a cuisine show on CNN. You've seen Scampia. It's the place where they showed the non-pizza part of Naples' culinary cuisine. Is wonderful. And a very poor neighborhood where people do share a lot of resources. That was the point of Stanley Tucci's visit. But he reached out to people there because, again, it's a hard scrabble, kind of a dockland area that really needed boosting up. And Pope Francis is always looking for opportunities to raise the morale of people, and especially workers. And fifth and finally, we're almost at the end of this part, he makes a special outreach to young people because, let's face it, people finishing high school or college, facing very uncertain economic prospects. Maybe they can get a job in the gig economy, be a Uber driver or deliverer, but in many countries, the unemployment rate is still high. We're fortunate here in the United States. It's around 3%, almost historically low. But he traveled, for example, to Daejeon, South Korea, and he addressed a gathering of thousands of young people because they have the South Korean youth are known for high levels of anxiety. It has a very high suicide rate for teens and people in their 20s because they have a trouble bridging the school, even universities, and the job market. They need, I don't know, internships or apprenticeships to bridge their way in a country with high unemployment. He seeks out the youth wherever he goes, especially with regard to worker justice, how the workers, whether in South Korea or elsewhere, are treated. Okay, so we finished only 2 of the 6, but the others can go a little faster, so 5 minutes each on numbers 3, 4, 5, and 6. So we're going to change the slide from that beautiful Sardinian miner's helmet to the cover of Laudato Si. And I have my copy. There's many versions of it. Here's another, this is from the U.S. Bishop's version, I think. So Laudato Si was Pope Francis's encyclical letter. It was published in June of 2015 on care for our common home. The title Laudato Si is 2 Italian words taken from a prayer it's called the Canticle of the Creatures, addressed to God. So the Si, it means you, is God. It's addressed to God. And Laudato means may you be praised. So Saint Francis in 1200 or so write the words, Lord, may you be praised for your creatures, brother, sun, sister, moon, etc. And Pope Francis borrowed that as the opening. And there's a beautiful, I would say almost a synchronicity between Saint Francis of Assisi, so living around the year 1200, and Pope Francis, our Pope in these years, who chose that name. No Pope had ever had. He's Francis I. No Pope had ever chosen the name Francis. And some theologians have noticed the commonality. So here's a book called Francis of Rome and Francis of Assisi. This was published less than a year after Pope Francis took office, so sometime in 2014, by the great South American, actually Brazilian theologian Leonardo Boff. You can see that title there. Francis of Rome, Francis of Assisi. And as I look now, I'm a Jesuit. Pope Francis is a Jesuit. We love Ignatian spirituality, but Pope Francis seems to have drunk deeply from the well of Franciscan spirituality as well. And Leonardo Boff saw this very early in Francis's papacy. It took me a little longer, even after I had read this book, it took me a little longer to realize how much Franciscan spirituality there is in Pope Francis. So I'll just tick off the three ways that Pope Francis's concerns echo St. Francis's concerns from 800 years earlier. The first one's on your screen. The care for the environment. Remember how St. Francis of Assisi loved the animals? Even on his feast day of October 4th, we're invited to bring our pets into churches. I have blessed some strange animals, not just dogs and cats either, over the closest Sunday to October 4th. And it's coming up. The feast day is just a week away, feast day of St. Francis of Assisi. So he's the patron saint of animals and of ecology, and Pope Francis picked up, and we're going to see the details in a moment. The two other ways that Pope Francis reflects the concerns of St. Francis is, second, care for the poor, closeness to the poor. In fact, St. Francis of Assisi was called Il Poverello, the little poor man. It's a diminutive. And so he was poor himself. Although he grew up rich, his father was an affluent merchant. He stripped off his fancy garments in this town square of Assisi, showing his renunciation of wealth. And he founded the Franciscans. He lived poorly as a beggar, a mendicant friar, and that was the model of poverty, voluntary poverty that he embraced. So close to the poor. Pope Francis also, I've already talked at great length about his concern for the poor and the unemployed, etc. And the third way, coming up soon, is peace. Pope Francis has made amazing strides for peace, and so did St. Francis. In fact, here's one other point of similarity. In the year 1219, St. Francis of Assisi got in a boat. I don't know how he did this, with one other Franciscan, another friar. Maybe the friar did most of the rowing of the boat. Somehow, he crossed the Mediterranean from Italy to Egypt, and he met in Damietta, Egypt, is near Alexandria, the port city on the Mediterranean, the delta of the Nile River. And he met with the Sultan, I forget his full name, Talik. He was the Sultan, the Caliph over all of the Muslim-dominated regions of North Africa. He was trying to end the Crusades, to bring about peace where terrible violence had been happening between Christians and the Muslims. And so this was a peace mission in 1219. And wouldn't you know that in 2019, 800 years ago, later, exactly, Pope Francis crossed the Mediterranean. Okay, he was in an Alitalia plane, not a rowboat, but he met in Egypt with leaders of Egypt. And one was Tayeb, the grand imam of Al-Azhar, one of the highest respected dignitaries and authorities of Sunni Islam. So an amazing, and they signed a year later, they signed a document on human fraternity, which the two religions should cooperate, live together in peace and harmony. So those are the three ways that Pope Francis resembles St. Francis 800 years later. Just to say a few words, though, about Laudato Si. It's a long document, 40,000 words. It has 246 paragraphs. My copy is over 184 pages, so it's all on the Vatican website, but look how thick it is. It's a big print job in case you want to print it out sometime. But you could buy many different versions, including the one on your screen. It challenges us to see, judge, and act. That's the methodology of Catholic social teaching. To see the environmental degradation that includes climate change. He denounces the climate change deniers. It's real. Temperatures are going up. It's caused by humans, and we need to convert ourselves to action. So see, judge, and act. Make some judgments about what would help the environment, and then act on those. Reduce our carbon footprint, change structures of the economy so that we're not degrading the earth. He has many wonderful parts of this document. I don't have time to go through all of them, but he urges us to think about the future. We call that intergenerational solidarity. Plan for the next generations. Don't be greedy and use up all the resources, whether that's fossil fuels or minerals, for our generation. preserve the earth. He complains about the way that, we call this technocratic paradigm. Everything seems to be, we put all of our faith in machines, technology. We're putting all of our eggs in the basket of artificial intelligence. We need to get back to nature and to have a change of mentality to get away from humans treating the earth like a tyrant and kind of pillaging the earth, and more towards respecting the earth. Stewardship is a good, positive word. He wants to go beyond just being good stewards of the earth to actually having a creation-centered spirituality where we put the earth at a higher place than we ever had before. So I could say much more about his message. He comes out in favor of protecting biodiversity. He sees the social crisis, the crisis of poverty, as integrally connected, that's his phrase, integral ecology, with the crisis of the environment. They go together. They're not two crises. They're one crisis, united by our misunderstanding of our place in creation. So he's got a whole social theory that undergirds his treatment of the ecology, and he loves calling the earth our common home. There's no plan B. There's no backup planet. We don't have any. We've got to take care of our common home. And ultimately, he wants us to, he urges ecological conversion. Conversion is a change of mind, of attitude, taking up a new spirit of wonder and awe of the earth and taking joy in the earth, as St. Francis did with his Canticle of the Creatures, brother, sun, sister, moon, etc. He's never despairing. He recognized the severity, the urgency of the problem. In fact, his thoughts have contributed to those United Nations COP, Conference of Parties, these ongoing annual, there's another one coming up very soon, I think in Dubai, these conferences where climate change is negotiated, targets are set for reducing carbon. So his words helped move forward the last few COPs. So it's an 8-year-old document now. Oh, and I believe that just a few days from now, October 4th or so, he's putting out a follow-up document. I haven't seen it. No one, I have Vatican sources. No one's seen it. It may not be an encyclical, which is usually very long and complicated. It may be a shorter letter format, but he's going to update Laudato Si just in the next week or so. So keep your eyes peeled for a new Vatican document on the economy. And I just want to talk a little bit about, for a couple sentences, about action. You can see and judge, and this encyclical does a good job of seeing, recording the environmental degradation and making some judgments. What's the root causes? What are the mechanisms? It's almost like a doctor making a diagnosis and a prescription, but then you have to act. So he's urging us to act, whether that's recycling or switching to low carbon footprint, getting an electric vehicle, all the things that we can do. And I'm so proud of some nonprofit, church-inspired, but faith-based, but nonprofit organizations like Catholic Climate Covenant, CCC, and friends of mine are among the executive committee. It's a wonderful group in the United States that tries to enact, put into effect, the words of Laudato Si. And by the way, I have a last word here on the ecology. We are right now in the middle of the season of creation. It runs from September 1st to October 4th, feast day of St. Francis of Assisi. And so make note of these 5 weeks being especially kind to the environment, move the needle, do something that will actually help our environment, raise the level of awareness, and do practical things that will help the environment. Okay, so we're now ready for the fourth one, family life. So already we had a theme of family life in one of our earlier themes. It was a third on our list of 10. So here's where Pope Francis took that long-standing message of concern for families, overcoming the challenges to the families, that Pope Francis said, well, it's time to do something again, to renew this plank of Catholic social teaching. So he called 2 consecutive synods, it's called the Worldwide Synod of Bishops. And by the way, there's also back-to-back synods. 2014 and 15 were on the family. And as you know, starting, about a week from now, we're having another back-to-back synod. This is very unusual. They're called extraordinary synods. They're usually 3 years apart. They will be on the notion of synodality itself, walking together. That's the notion of synod, Greek word root. So where we live in unprecedented times, this is one of the greatest initiatives the church has ever had, the Synod on Synodality, and the 400 and some delegates are meeting in Rome. I know some of them. I'm delighted to know some like Father Jim Martin and Sister Maria Simperman, and many of the U.S. bishops are going over there, 400 voting members and all. In any case, getting back to family life, he called these two synods, and then when they had convened over the course of 2 years, Pope Francis published his document. You see it there on your screen. It's the same cover that I'm holding up here. And, he wrote this published it in April of 2016, so about 6 months after the second of the two synods. And it's, I believe to this day, it's the longest church document in history, over 60,000 words. It's a book. It's not just a booklet, it's a book. And it has wonderful materials. And to tell you the truth, when I started reading through it, I was not surprised by much of the material. Why? Because Pope Francis, even before this 60,000 word document, had already published a great deal about the family, mostly actually in homilies. Many of the homilies get printed. So here I have a book that came out in a few years before that synod, Pope Francis on the Family, and it consists of, about 100 homilies he gave about the dignity of family life, meeting the challenges that families face. It's actually a very beautiful compilation of short homilies. And basically what he did was he stitched together the proceedings, the findings of those two synods. The members had voted paragraph by paragraph on propositions, and he had a lot of they call it working documents, final documents of two synods, 2014 and 15. But this document is a wonderful treatment of so many issues relating to the challenges to family life. And by the way, people have loved it so much. This is from an Irish priest gave me this. So it's a triptych. It's a fold. It's more than a greeting card, but it's an Amoris Laetitia. You see the Holy Family here. You see different artwork. Again, this is from Ireland. So Amoris Laetitia, a Pope Francis inspired piece of artwork. Let me just read you the titles of some of the chapters, the 9 chapters of Amoris Laetitia. He starts with the Bible, the family and the Bible, in the light of the Word of God. Then the experience and challenges of families, chapter 2. Chapter 3, looking to Jesus, the vocation of the family, talking about the Holy Family of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Chapter 4, love in marriage, and that's basically the title of the whole thing. Talking about families, what they put up with. In this chapter, by the way, he complains about the dinner table, where all too often, I'm paraphrasing now, all the members of the family are surfing on their phones instead of looking each other in the eye. I hope that doesn't happen in your family, but he's very upset of how technology invades our private family time and space. So quality time with the family. Don't let technology or screens intrude with that. In chapter 5, love made fruitful. It's about raising children, how to socialize children in the ways of the church, faith life, and more secular values. Chapter 6 is pastoral perspectives. By the way, here he shares his homily notes for how to give a good homily at weddings. I've actually made good use of that chapter in the years since. He's very generous with his advice. Chapter 7 is about raising kids towards a better education of children. Chapter 8 is the most controversial, accompanying, discerning, and integrating weakness. The weakness is families that break up. Very often he talks about the effects of alcoholism or addictions or crime, gangs, or sometimes neglect, and sometimes physical abuse. And so he talks about what happens when a couple breaks up for good or bad reasons, and then they want to remarry. Each member wants to remarry. Can they re-enter the church? Can they receive the sacraments? Do they need an annulment? And normally that it would be the route to get it. And he entertains the problem of families that there are barriers to getting an annulment, all kinds of barriers that he tried to lessen over the years, but it hasn't really worked. And so that He treats, it's really just in the footnotes of chapter 8, he treats those special cases where maybe a local pastor, through what we call the internal forum, can excuse the conditions and recognize why a couple couldn't get an annulment and why a second marriage, even if not recognized by the church, wouldn't stand in the way of receiving the Eucharist. And he has that famous phrase that comes from Evangelii Gaudium. Let me get the wording exactly correct. That the Eucharist is not a prize for the perfect, but a powerful medicine and nourishment for the weak. That's from Evangelii Gaudium, paragraph 351. So he wants to extend the sacraments, but he didn't order any diocese to do that. He suggested the practice of internal forum solutions where you talk to people, maybe they make penance, and then maybe they can be readmitted to communion, even though they are still in what the church calls irregular unions. And the key to all these arguments isn't that he's waiving the old principle of indissolubility of marriage, but he's rather opening the door to conscience, people in their conscience. And this quote is from early in the document is very telling. The church is called not to replace conscience, but to form it. So to create people who can make good decisions, and even when their marriage is dissolved, impossible to continue, they have a way to receive the sacraments. That became very controversial. 4 elderly cardinals, they were very traditionalist cardinals, 2 of them have since died, questioned the Pope, challenged him. They issued a letter called a dubia, doubts about the Pope. You must clarify this. It's confusing the faithful. And Pope Francis didn't want to get involved, didn't want to get embroiled in a big debate about Amoris Laetitia or his signaling the openness to this new pastoral initiative of accepting divorced and civilly remarried people into the church. So he didn't answer it. He deliberately left it ambiguous. And I think that might be the best pastoral strategy of gradualism. Take people where they are, even if they're in irregular unions. Maybe they can get an annulment eventually. So that was chapter 8, the most controversial. And chapter 9 has a beautiful title, The Spirituality of Marriage and the Family. And he talks about the spiritual meaning of family. So just to summarize this point, it's area 4. Pope Francis cares about families. He is he detects very acutely, very perceptively the challenges facing family life today, economic, poverty, all kinds of challenges, including divorce, civil divorce. And he is reaching out to families to give them the resources, and he urges people to have better marriage preparation, better marriage encounter, all of the programs that will help families thrive in our age. Okay, we're ready for the 5th one. Sorry, we're just a little bit behind schedule, but I can catch up. Concern for refugees. And the next slide is a picture. I have to admit, it's the cover of one of my books, but I chose that cover because it has to do with refugees. That photo was taken on April 16th in 2016. So Pope Francis had been Pope for 3 years, and he wanted to continue his advocacy for refugees and migrants around the world. And he asked, where is the refugee crisis being felt the harshest? And his advisors said, well, not so far from here, so from Italy to Greece, is an island, a Greek island called Lesbos. And that's where a major migration route goes right through there. People escaping from wars, especially the Syrian civil war, from drought. Think of northern Africa, where there's the Sahel region is there's a drought, the crops have failed. There's hunger, there's starvation, there's gangs, there's wars. A place like South Sudan and Somalia, where there's no functioning government. People were fleeing these lands, and their routes, or migration routes, sometimes on rickety boats, took them through Lesbos and another island that belongs to Italy called Lampedusa, between Africa and Sicily. So he went to both places. His first foreign trip was to Lampedusa, July of 2013. But in 2016, this very photogenic photo, I got to choose it for the cover of my book, Mercy in Action. He's there with refugees from all over the Middle East. He's in a refugee camp called Moira. I think that's the root word for Mary. It was named for the Blessed Virgin Mary. It's some Greek Turkish dialect. So he went there. He ate meals with the refugees, very modest conditions, had this photo taken. By the way, just off camera, if the camera lens were a little wider, set for a wide angle, you would see another great religious leader, Patriarch Bartholomew of the Orthodox Christian Church. So he visited Francis. And by the way, they've traveled together a number of places. So that was refugee camp in Lesbos was just one. It wasn't just that one trip, though. He has gone all over the world. He's been in Mexico on the just across the U.S. border, Ciudad Juarez, just across from El Paso, visiting the refugee camps there, noticing the barriers on the wall that, obviously that's a major migration route from Latin America to the global north, in this case, the United States. He just returned, by the way, from Marseille, where there was a major conference on migration in the entire Mediterranean region. He was there last weekend. So you can read articles about Pope Francis's trip to Marseille, and he's southern France. He's always urging world leaders to be more merciful, to lower the barriers, to stop being anti-immigrant, backlash, nationalism, populism, if you will. When he was in Marseille, he used two new phrases, analogies that I had never heard before. And I try to read every word he ever writes or publishes. He said, stop treating migrants like hot potatoes, that you don't want them to, you want to hold them. You want to just push them out of your country if they ever cross the border. Hot potatoes. I think that was directed at Viktor Orban, the dictator of Hungary. Or he said, don't treat them like ping pong balls. So in the Mediterranean, Italy will ship them to, I don't know, Greece or France or Spain or some other country. They're not ping pong balls. They're people with dignity. So I could talk for a long time about the refugee crisis. 100 million people are displaced either internally within their country, often by civil war or gangs or drug cartels, but many tens of millions have crossed borders and are seeking, they're displaced from their homeland, they're seeking a place to live. Pope Francis has called upon the resources of our Bible. Remember that Israel was an exiled nation. They escaped Egypt. They wandered. They were wandering for decades. They were in exile many times. The Holy Family was in exile. Pope Pius XII even wrote a 1951 encyclical, Exsul Familia. It's about the refugee crisis after World War II, and it's about the Holy Family in exile. Exsul Familia was the title. So Pope Francis draws upon our tradition. He issues annual World Day of Migrants and Refugee messages that is celebrated twice a year, actually. One was just last week in September. It was Sunday, the 20-something. So lots of opportunities to spread the word of concern for refugees. Pope Francis, it might be his strongest message, the virtue of hospitality, caring for people. And people ask me sometimes, why does Pope Francis care so much about refugees? And I give them a quick 3-point answer. One is his family were refugees. They immigrated from Italy in the 1920s. He was born in 1936, I think. Yeah. So he was first generation, and his family fled poverty in northern Italy, to Argentina. So therefore, but for the grace of God, go I. He made it safely to Argentina. Not everyone these days is so lucky. They wander, they're shipwrecked, etc. Another reason is that he just cares. I mean, it's part of the Jesuit charism. We started the Jesuit Refugee Service many decades ago, 1980, and he has invested a lot in the refugee question. So solidarity, mercy, standing up for refugees, cognizant of what the church can do. And he has urged every church in Europe to take in at least one refugee family. And I'm not sure we have done that very much in the United States, but hopefully we'll get the message. And the cover of my book, I chose that because I believe his visits to refugee camps are among his highest profile travels, but more importantly, spreading the message of social concern. Okay, our final theme is peacemaking. Let's go to that next slide. This might be my favorite slide of all, my favorite picture associated with Pope Francis. I make the association. It's a photo that I use in a course I'm teaching right now on theologies of peace. And there it is. That is the statue of the knotted gun. It's outside of the United Nations. That's a UN building. It's only a couple of miles from where I am right now, Fordham University here in New York City. There's a couple of imitations or knockoffs or replicas of that statue in other cities of the world. There's at least 2 in Europe. But I love the knotted gun. The gun is a dangerous thing. So what are we called to do? We're called to stop the violence, make a knot in that gun so it's not usable. I believe that Pope Francis, he's never actually mentioned the statue, but I think that statue or a message like that is in the back of his mind all the time. How can we stop violence? How can we turn from the traditional ways of settling grievances, conflicts, counterclaims, differences of opinion between countries, between warring tribes, between terrorist groups? How can we settle those peacefully at a negotiating table through diplomacy, not through violence? Well, Pope Francis wrote an encyclical in 2020, and it's called Fratelli Tutti. Here, I'll hold it up high. Fratelli Tutti, which literally means brothers all. I like to call it siblings all. Shouldn't exclude women at all, sisters. So Fratelli Tutti. It's another phrase of Saint Francis of Assisi. Again, two Italian words from that man of Assisi, a man of peace, right? Peacemaking, interreligious dialogue. And Pope Francis has reached out, not just in the words of this document, which urge us to put away the ways of war and to de-escalate conflicts and disarm, but also to reconcile, to make lasting peace based on justice. So he likes the word peace building, create the conditions for peace. So popes since Vatican II have been saying this sentence: peace is not just the absence of war. It's a deeper thing. Think of the Hebrew word shalom. Sure, it means peace, but it means a peaceful order, an order of tranquility, of harmony, of justice, a peace that's built on a foundation of justice. Every pope for the last 100 or so years has issued statements against armed conflict. Pope Benedict the 15th against World War I, Pius XI and XII against World War II, John Paul II against those invasions of Kuwait in 1990 and Iraq in 2003. Usually their voice is ignored. I would say Pope Francis has been actually quite successful. He helped negotiate the peace settlement in the nation of Colombia on his home continent of South America. He even spent a whole week there. That's one of his longest papal trips back in 2019 to visit with both sides, the government and the former what were they called? The opposition or the rebels to smooth things over, make sure they laid down their arms, to put his weight against that in favor of the peace settlement, the negotiated settlement. He's been to South Sudan, where there was civil war for a year. He helped negotiate an end to the internecine warfare in South Sudan. He called the two rival leaders to the Vatican for a retreat, and he kneeled down and kissed the boots, the military boots of the two rival leaders that were sitting next to each other on a couch, urging them to stay at the bargaining table a little longer. Took a year for that settlement to go through, but it did. And now in other cases, Central African Republic, he travels to places, even where there's terrorism and danger. A lot of his trips, the security officers were saying, yeah, maybe he should stay home. It's too dangerous. He went anyway to many countries. So now he's working on a Ukrainian peace, trying to meet with the Russians and the Ukrainians, trying to be even-handed. He's tipped his hand saying, yeah, the FARC is the group in Colombia, right? The armed rebels that came up on the chat. So he's always trying to be a negotiator. Will it work in Ukraine? I don't know. He has tried to stay as neutral as possible. He's clearly stated that the invasion of Putin and Russia cannot stand. It was unjust. He's called the Ukrainian people crucified and almost martyred. So he's trying to get both sides to the table. I don't know that it's going to work, but you can't blame him for doing everything he can to get peace. Just a couple of other things. He's urged us to disarm. His speeches to the UN and to the US Congress in 2015 focused on ending the arms trade, so that was really important. He has worked to challenge nuclear weapons. He said that even possessing nuclear weapons has sinful elements to it. He traveled to Nagasaki and Hiroshima, Japan. He shed a lot of tears there. They were clearly on the screen when he was in Japan about 5 years ago. The horrors of nuclear war he's very aware of. So he negotiates, he meets with world leaders. He's not afraid to talk to the Putins and the Viktor Orbáns of the world, even though they're dictators, to try to get them to pursue peace. And again, people ask me why, and here's my answer. He's motivated by his family history. Came from a kind of obstreperous family where there was a lot of fighting and arguing, bitter quarrels. He told a story in his TED talk where he used to go to bed crying because his uncles and cousins would come over to his house and would bitterly argue for hours, and it left a trauma on him. He was a very impressionable young boy. But also he lived through war, civil war in Argentina. It was called the Dirty War from 1976 to 1983, when he was superior of the Argentinian Jesuits. He saw war. He saw the horrors of war, the trauma of war, the murders of war firsthand. And again, he's a Jesuit. And in our constitutions, we're called to take up ministries that are all about being ministers of reconciliation and getting quarreling parties to negotiate and lay down their arms. So it's part of our spirituality, and he works on it. Sounds idealistic, but he actually has more results than any world leader I can think of as far as negotiating. Okay, we could take the knotted gun down as much as I like it. I just have a couple of closing comments. I realize I'm a few minutes over time, but I just want to give a couple of closing comments that may be helpful to you. Oh, by the way, I'll hold up. Here's a book that was put together just recently, a collection of short writings. It's only about a 100-page book. Pope Francis Against War. And it's, again, a short little book. Building a Culture of Peace is the phrase, and it's short snippets from his World Day of Peace messages. Every January 1st, every pope since the 1960s has issued one of these messages. A couple of summary points here. What does Pope Francis accomplish in light of Catholic social teaching? So here, I'm going to push this down a little bit here. Okay. Here's what I think he accomplishes. He takes all 10 of the themes that we looked at in our last two sessions, and he tries to stay faithful to the tradition, taking all 10 all seriously. And I think you could have checked off all 10 of the themes that I talked about in the first two sessions in the course of those 6 themes of Pope Francis. Family and common good and subsidiarity and property, they all came in there. Option for the poor, environment, etc. So he advancing it, the teaching without disrupting it or in any way renouncing it or disavowing it, but updating it, all 10 themes. Like every pope, a second point, he does have his own personal style, his own personal set of concerns. So theology of the people from his Argentinian background, concern for refugees from his Jesuit background, his family was refugees. So he's drawing from his biography to put a new spin on the tradition, but every pope does that. It's not some idiosyncratic thing. John Paul II, with his deep knowledge of Eastern Europe, issued encyclicals challenging communism and challenging labor rights, etc. So a lot of every pope puts his own spin on the teachings. And I would say that a third point, he looks at the world very carefully. He's a very good discerner. He picks up on the crises. So what have we seen today? The crisis of the environment, climate change, and he responded to that in Laudato Si. The crisis of refugees, responded to that. As our fifth theme. The crisis of peace. Of course, the Ukraine war is the most recent, but every year he's been pope. We had the Syria crisis in his first year, and there was still going on, civil war. Every year you could point to another threat to peace that he has responded to. So global challenges, labor relations, poverty, inequality getting worse. So he's responded to all of those crises. I've already done the fourth one. My fourth point was the Franciscan spirituality, but I already said he emulates Saint Francis of Assisi in closeness to the poor, il poverello, in environmental concern, care for the earth, Laudato Si, and in peacemaking, his peacemaking missions, which is to countries, but also reaching out to other religions like Islam, but many world religions he has met with. And I think my final point is simply, you can look at the track record of Pope Francis regarding social teaching as a little bit political, a little bit economic, a little bit of a cultural critic, but really it's all of those and none of them. He's not addressing the world as a politician or an economist or an ideologue of any sort. His teachings, his example of his trips, his travels. He's gone on 43 international travels, a lot to do with refugees and peacemaking. He's giving us an example of activism for social justice. So he's a pope. He's a religious leader. He likes to consult. He likes to needle world leaders to follow their conscience, not to be anti-refugee, not to be militaristic. I think his personal style, again, with world leaders, leaders of other religions, is very effective, very one-on-one. Someone called it an artisanal approach. It's like a special one-to-one relationships. There's no pattern there. It's idiosyncratic. It's one-on-one, but I think it's effective. Okay, so I've reached the end of my list, and we're now ready to take those questions. And I realize I went about 10 minutes long, so as many questions as come up, I don't want to. So Bonnie's going to be our leader here.
Okay, that was great again. We are so lucky to have had you. We have 7 questions so far, anyways. One from the committee is, people who promote a prosperity theology seem to believe that individuals have the ability to transcend poverty themselves through devotion and thinking positively, rather than relying on charity or government programs. Is this realistic?
Yeah, I'm familiar somewhat with this prosperity gospel. I've seen Joel Osteen on TV too, right? The preachers from evangelical churches or those mega churches, they have good production value, lighting and music and everything. It's a part. There's it's not blatantly wrong, but it's only a small part of what I consider to be a very well-rounded tradition that considers the community, not just individuals. So I would ask those people with the prosperity gospel, okay, so you've got yours, but what does that mean for the poorest people in the world? To what extent are you reaching out to people in need? And remember that principle of property. I think it was the fifth on my long list. Property is good. You're right. If you work hard, you get goods, you get a nice big bank account. But you can't take it with you. How are you sharing your wealth? How is your wealth helping anybody else but you? So again, it's not a condemnation of those who are fortunate enough to make some money, but my question, and the Catholic social teaching question, is how are you parlaying those riches, those benefits, those privileges into responsible citizenship and, of course, faithful discipleship, citizenship and discipleship. They're both communal, and our church, Catholic Church, is a very communal voice. Good question.
Okay. Jane wants to know about, some Catholics are following Protestant evangelicals and promoting prosperity theology or prosperity gospel. But what is the message for our poor and vulnerable? It seems to place the burden or the blame of their situations on them. What are your thoughts on prosperity theology in relation to Catholic social justice? I guess you just answered that.
Yeah, it's pretty much, but let me add this one thing. So part of the prosperity gospel is God will favor me if I'm faithful. And yeah, okay, well, sure, I'll buy that as far as it goes. There's actually some biblical basis for that. But it goes further. What's the converse or the corollary of that? The corollary is, well, if I see somebody who doesn't have a lot of goods, doesn't have a deep bank account, maybe they're beggar. I took the subway today, and I was given the opportunity. I didn't have any cash on me to give money to several panhandlers, beggars, and when I look at my heart goes out. I hope that everyone watching this webinar has a compassion, that your heart goes out to this person. But the converse of a prosperity gospel is, well, if they don't have money, if they haven't made their money, then they're to be blamed for that. So it's very eager. It's an easy step to start blaming the poor for their poverty. So I don't think that is, sure, there are some people who maybe they fall into alcoholism, but of course, even that is a disease. It's not so much, not necessarily blameworthy. So it's the prosperity gospel, the soft underbelly, my criticism is it's quick to blame the poor for their poverty and to somehow impute that God is not favorable to them. Well, God can be favorable to them, and maybe the hands that will bring them up, that lift them up, is our hands. So that's my response to the prosperity gospel.
Thank you. Anonymous attendee wants to know, do you think that Catholics are listening to the Pope's lens that points to most social ills stemming from structural inequity?
Yeah, I mean, that's a hard one to get. How many people listen to the Pope's words and then, of course, do something about it? So the see, judge, and then the acting. So I have a couple of thoughts about that. One is, so I've been teaching for, I think, 27 years, higher education, so graduate students, undergraduates, and hardly any of them, even the ones who have gone to good Catholic high schools by the time they get to college, have ever actually read any of the encyclicals that I was quoting, or even the shorter things like when the Pope writes a letter for World Day of Peace or World Day of Migrants. So I guess I'm becoming less optimistic that the words that the Pope writes actually get read. And by the way, there's no excuse. There's so well laid out. Every word the Pope publishes or says, homilies, are printed, or what's the word? Not printed, but published on the Vatican website. Just go www.vatican.va. It's the most easy to navigate website I've ever seen. All you got to do is click on Pope Francis, click on, is it a homily? Is it encyclical? And all the words are there in about 14 different languages. I'm only good at English, frankly. But so anyway, the words are available. Unfortunately, my evidence suggests seldom read. But then that question, the second part of your question, though, is do they act on it? Well, I'm actually a little more optimistic about this part. I've seen, I'll just speak for myself, former students of mine have gone on to work for, well, look at the 6 topics I just talked about. I've had graduate students go on to work on full-time careers in peacemaking. There's institutes of peace. There's all kinds of peace groups, and I've had students go into that line of work. Refugees, I've had students go on to work for Jesuit refugee services and Catholic charities that care for newly arrived migrants in the United States. What are some other ones? Oh, ecology, the Catholic Climate Covenant. Several of my best students went on to work for that wonderful nonprofit organization. Family ministries in dioceses. Yes, I've had students go to that. So I'm just talking for myself. I hope that other people can say the same thing, that they know people who took seriously the words of popes on all 6 of these themes, the economic ones too. And even though they might not be able to quote you chapter and verse of any encyclical, they're doing the Lord's work, maybe in a direct way, working for Catholic agencies, or perhaps in an indirect way. Yeah, there it is. There's the website of the Vatican. Except for it's not com, it's VA, www.vatican.va. That's the country code for Vatican. Okay, so don't get that wrong. Yeah, they might lead you astray. So maybe people are enacting their justice rather than studying it. They don't know the documents, but somehow almost intuitively, what do we call this? Instinctively, by natural inclination, they gravitate their way towards a social justice message. What's that old saying? We more often act our way to new ways of thinking justice than we do think our way to new ways of acting. I don't know who said that first. It wasn't me. I'm borrowing from some unknown person. But the thinking doesn't always precede the acting. We don't convince ourselves to do good things. Sometimes we just do the good things, get involved in excellent or volunteer, whatever it is. And then we find that, oh, well, we have new ways of thinking now that I've mixed a little bit in maybe a poor neighborhood, or I've delivered goods in some program. Maybe I will have a new way of thinking. And Pope Francis says this all the time. That's why he wanted to be among the common people and the poor. So there's my theology of the people again. There's Bergoglio in middle age, right? Future Pope Francis hanging out with common people. He's not wearing cardinal robes, is he? He's just hanging out. I suspect they know who he is, by the way. But by being among the underprivileged, sometimes that changes who you are. It gives you a new dedication. So excellent question. Appreciate that. There you go.
Do you think that the 1% conservatives or even Catholics fear this Pope's power to point a moral finger at them for maintaining inequality? Or do you think that they find him effective in changing religious minds on things like taxation and property monopolies or not? Essentially, do you have a pulse on whether they dislike him as much as someone like AOC or Bernie Sullivan, who speaks mostly in the same vein?
Bernie Sanders? Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I don't have my finger on the pulse of the top 1%. I don't think I know anybody in the top 1%. I have, but so there are trustees of all the Jesuit schools. Now I'm going to take back my words. I have actually met a number. So the trustees of Fordham University, they're coming to our campus this week. Welcome to the Bronx, trustees. They come from all over the country. So maybe I should hang out outside the trustees meeting and ask them what they think of Pope Francis and do a little poll. Sure, there are some affluent people who are on board with Pope Francis's message, who it's a matter of conscience. They inform their conscience by listening to the Pope. Maybe they get on Vatican.va, know what the Pope says. I get some water here. And then, of course, there are many people who resist the Pope's message. In fact, some of those people are Roman Catholic priests and bishops and cardinals, right? Mm-hmm. There are people who think he's gone too far, that his message is somehow discontinuous with previous popes. I don't agree with that at all. I hope that it's been clear in these 3 sessions that he's in utter continuity with the 10 themes. By the way, I wrote books about those 10 themes long before Francis acceded to the chair of St. Peter. I wrote some of those books during the pontificate of John Paul II and others during the pontificate of Benedict. There's utter continuity between those popes, and go back to Leo XIII in 1891. So I hope that the people in the most affluent group, 1%, can accept this. I don't expect all of them to be on board, but I would hope that some, maybe half, maybe more.
Okay. This is from RBS. Can you give an assessment from your perspective of how the Pope's ear towards the workers sits with cardinals, bishops, clergy in general?
I've actually been impressed over the years, not 100%, but most of the way, I'd say 90% impressed by how the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, so that's the umbrella organization. They have offices in Washington, D.C. If you want to visit, 3211 4th Street Northeast, across the street from Catholic University, where I once taught. They have offices there, and they have a whole department of social concerns. I think it's called Integral Human Development and World Peace. That office every year, so it's sponsored by the Bishops' Conference, but it's mostly lay people that work there. Every year they put out a Labor Day statement. So just a month ago, right, we had Labor Day, September 6th, was it? Every year they put out an excellent Labor Day statement supporting workers and unions and standing up for the right to strike. That was in the air as these current strikes were looming at that time. So there's no deficit of leadership from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. I suspect there are some individual bishops that are more enthusiastic about the labor movement, others that maybe are against labor unions, because think about it. If you're a bishop, you probably run a school system, probably run clinics or hospitals in your diocese. You got to hire clerical workers, custodians, graveyard. You got to have grave diggers, and a unionized workforce is going to cost you more money. So you probably have a monetary incentive to keep salaries low and keep unions weak or off campus schools, et cetera. But the right thing to do, in line with Catholic social teaching for the last 130 years, is to recognize unions, not to fight them, not to ward them off, not to hire fancy lawyers that are the union avoidance lawyers. There's a whole industry there. So I can't take a head count, but I'm satisfied with the current leadership of the U.S. Catholic bishops as a whole. I can't vouch for every single bishop, though.
Okay, thank you. Do you think that the Vatican can do more to demonstrate climate conversion to the laity?
Yeah. Okay, so it goes, I'm no expert in science or anything, but do you recall that I referred to Pope Benedict XVI as the Green Pope? And I don't think I explained why last time. He was the Pope, the first one, to put photovoltaic cells on the roofs of many of the Vatican buildings. Okay, so that was about the year 2008 or so. It was the middle of his 8-year pontificate. He he earned the title of the Green Pope. He also published some pretty good documents, although not a full encyclical. He had 4 long paragraphs of his 2009 encyclical Caritas in Veritate. So he did a lot of good things. He gave church funds to carbon offsets in Eastern Europe, planting forests in Hungary and other countries. So a lot of good things from Benedict. If he was the Green Pope, what do we call Pope Francis? The greener Pope? And by the way, Pope Francis borrows a great deal from, I mentioned him before on refugees, Patriarch Bartholomew of the Orthodox Christian Church, because Bartholomew, he was in office long before Francis was. He did amazing things, publishing and activism on green issues. And Pope Francis even quotes, in fact, if you turn, I can't find it here, if you turn to the beginning of Laudato Si, in 2 of the 3 first paragraphs of Laudato Si, Francis quotes Patriarch Bartholomew. So they travel together, they do ecological things together. So those are 2 men who very much agree. So I would love to see even more practical things that churches do. I'm aware of LEED buildings that are given the label LEED. They're certified at the highest level of energy conservation, green. So these are buildings that have to get certified. They have to pass inspections. So if more churches were LEED certified, if they, whatever, they had energy audits, et cetera, I would be delighted by that. That's putting your money where your mouth is, right? It's investing in LEED, saving materials, et cetera. I would love to see that. I don't know who RBS is, but I like him, or he or she already. That's a way that the church could, again, put its money where its mouth is, act by example and not just empty words. So I'm all on board with that.
Okay, RBS is here too. You've already sort of answered this question, but maybe you have more to add to it. It's, what's the best way you recommend to keep in touch about the Pope's writings and actions? So you said the Vatican already, the Vatican site.
The Vatican website is the place. It's my go-to place. I bookmarked it. My top 2 bookmarks are that and ESPN Sports. So I spend, I don't do a lot of web surfing, but those are my 2 go-tos every day. But, you can follow Catholic News Service, Religious News Service, and they'll often give you, look, the Pope's about to publish something. So if you hadn't heard that there's going to be a follow-up to Laudato Si on October 4th, take it from me today, but there are ways to, you could subscribe to the National Catholic Reporter, free daily newsletter. You could subscribe to America Magazine. I get a free, they push out an email every day, 2 emails a day. It's a little more than I want sometimes. But so there are ways the Catholic media will let you know when something new is coming.
How about the none and done?
I've heard that phrase, and I know that it's not spelled N-U-N, right? The sisters.
No, it's like N-O-N-E.
Yeah. So people, for the last 20 years, the number of survey respondents, when they are asked, to what religion are you affiliated, or do you have an affiliation? And they would say none. Now, that doesn't mean they don't believe in God. I've always noticed this difference. Almost everybody in America believes in God. It could be 94%, somewhere around there. Even people who say they're agnostic, which means I don't know, literally opposite of knowledge, agnostic. That many of them, if they are forced in a survey question, a forced choice, they would still hedge their bets and say, well, a God might exist. Maybe it's the force of the universe or the spirit of something. So a lot, it's just the rare person that across the board says they don't believe in God or a higher power. But you are correct. There are a lot of people, it's probably in the 20s, it could be in the 30s now, right? Who say, I am not affiliated with any church. And so maybe it's 22% Catholic, maybe it's still 40% Protestant or evangelical, maybe it's 2 or 3% Jewish, 3 or 4% Islam, maybe it's 5% Mormon. It adds up, and there's a little bit of Hindu and Buddhism. It adds up around 70. And then another 30 that are not affiliated. So none and done. That, people who say they're done means they were part of an organized religion and then they dropped out and they're not coming back. So, these are categories. Frankly, I believe that people can change. It's not just deathbed conversions either. People in their later years, I notice, as they go through the life cycle, not many teenagers want to go to church when they first show up on a college campus, even a Catholic college campus like Fordham, where I am, or BC, closer to you. They stop going to church, but then, they come back when they start having kids in their, let's say, late 20s, early 30s. They want their kids to get the sacraments, which is great, very important. They want their kids baptized, confirmed, first communion, confession. And of course, people want to get married in the church and buried in the church. I just did a funeral with a packed house last weekend in another state. And people want to be in a congregation when a close friend has died or when they themselves are facing death. They're eager for that hospital chaplain. So, I'm always going to be the optimist that says there's a place for religion, even if people can't quite express it, or they don't, on a survey, they don't mark the Catholic box. I still believe that people, if they're raised Catholic, there's still some residual hunger for God, connection to God. Maybe the church, they've had a bad experience of the church. The sex abuse crisis is plenty of reason to be suspicious or put off a bit, but maybe some are none, and maybe some say they're done. But I think, remember the task of evangelization that Pope Francis is so revved up for. He's fired up. We need to, to revive those engines, just as we've revived Catholic social teaching and renewed it.
And this, I believe, is the last question. Can you say that quote again about acting and thinking about at the border?
Sure. And I'll even tell you where I first heard it. When I was a graduate student at Emory University in Atlanta, I was studying at a Methodist university for my doctorate. One of my great professors was a Methodist himself, and he was a fairly famous guy. He died about 10 years ago. James Fowler. Jim Fowler, his most famous book was called Stages of Faith. And I borrow from him all the time. I just borrowed from his thoughts when I talked about the stages of people's lives, and they come back to the church sometimes later in life. Somewhere in a lecture that he gave, he said this sentence. I'll say it again slowly. We more often act our way into new ways of thinking than we think our way into new ways of acting. So Jim Fowler didn't take credit for that. He heard it somewhere else, but I don't know where he heard it. And again, the point of it, it's a clever wordplay. The point of it is, don't think that all good approaches start in the cerebrum, the brain. Sometimes the arrow of causality runs from our actions, what we do with our hands on any given day, and the thinking comes later. So I'll give you an example. If somebody, say you don't particularly care, you live in the suburbs, you don't care about your Boston area, you don't care about Roxbury or Mattapan or Mass and Cass, the place in south end of Boston where there's homeless encampment. You don't care about that. But then a close friend of yours says, I'm going down to Mass and Cass for maybe it's a food bank or a clothing drive or some kind of homeless relief. Well, would you drive me down there? And you say, okay, well, I could drive down. And then once you get down there, you're in Roxbury, they talk you into staying and maybe helping distribute, I don't know, sandwiches or clothing or something. And you say, well, I wasn't planning to spend this time, but you're my friend, I'll go with you. And before you know it, you're involved in a homeless relief project, and maybe you're volunteering multiple times. So you have acted your way, your hands led your brain, acted your way. And maybe you have a new way of thinking. Maybe it's a deeper social concern, a deeper solidarity. You see the people who are homeless, and they resemble yourself or people that you know. You see in their faces the face of Christ. I mean, that's the spiritual meaning here too. Remember Matthew 25, whenever you did this to the least of me, to least of these, you did it to me. So there you've acted your way to a new way of thinking, a new commitment anyway. And maybe you'll think more about structural injustice. Why are these people poor? Who's let them down? The educational system, the housing system, the credit system, the monetary, the banks. So that's an example. And you could also think your way into new ways of acting. It's not impossible, but that starts top down, right? Head to hands. And that's good. Maybe you'll be convinced that's conversion, and then you'll do something good for the environment or for the homeless. So both work, but Jim Fowler and whoever he was quoting believes that the better conduit, the route is from hands, action to thoughts later on, acting to thinking.
Well, it's been a delightful 3 weeks. Thank you so much. And until we meet again, take care.
Okay, and we have some closing slides from who's doing the close? Is there, you have to do your pitch, don't you?
I am. It's
Good.
me. I'm back.
Ellie.
Yep. Hi, I'm Ellie. I'm back. Father, that was fabulous. What a wonderful overview of Pope Francis. And I love your characterization of him as an example of social activism. I don't think I mean, I thought of him as being kind and gentle and thoughtful and forgiving, but you put him a whole new lens on him tonight, so I'm thankful for that. So, also, would you just go over your 3 books? Mercy in Action
They could
is
be
the
on the
ones that
screen now. We have
okay,
a slide for those. Yeah.
great.
And
Okay, so those will be in chat.
those going to be come up. Okay, right there in the chat. So, but
Okay.
I'll even hold them up. So
Oh,
the
there
book,
they are. Yeah, there
so
they
there
are.
you have all 3. Mercy in Action was published in 2018, halfway through the 10 years of Pope Francis. So the one on the left, Mercy in Action. So I got 2018, I got 5 years of Francis's pontificate there. The one on the other end, Pope Francis as moral leader, it'll be out on October 3rd or so. That one benefits from all 10 years or 9.9 years of Pope Francis's tenure as Pope. And the one in the middle, Living Justice, I started publishing that book. The first edition was in the year 2000. And about every 7 years since then, I've published a new edition. So the one coming out will be the 4th classroom edition. Again, sometime in October. You can order both of these either on Amazon or on the publisher's website. And I think you've received the URL. You can pre-order and you'll get them by the middle of October. And if you can't wait till then, this is the 3rd edition, the 3rd classroom edition of Living Justice, which came out in 2015. So I had about 2 years worth of Pope Francis material in here, but now you're getting 10 years worth in that beautiful new edition with the kind of beautiful candles in it. So thanks for hawking my books. I don't get much of any of the proceeds, but my publishers, Paulus Press and Roman and Littlefield, they appreciate the blurbs.
Okay. Do you ever sleep?
Hardly ever.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Well, thank you so much. This was really wonderful. We are providing these programs free of charge, but of course we love donations. And the slide that's up on your screen now shows you the little donation button that you can push, and you'll be guided through the process. Also in our chat, we've got some listing of current upcoming events. The first of which is Commonweal Conversations, which starts the new season October 2nd. The second one is I Believe, Help My Unbelief with Father Timothy, his series that's very popular. That starts October 16th. And finally, the Listening to Other Voices series opens its 23-24 season on October 19th. And we have Tiokasin Ghost Horse, who is a member of the Lakota Nation, and he's going to be speaking to the theme of what it means to be human. So those are 3 upcoming events in October. Thanks to everyone tonight. Thanks for coming, to the attendees for coming. Thanks to our backup team, Bria, our Zoom manager, Janet on chat, Bonnie on Q&A. We thank you all. And of course, Father, we thank you very, very much. Good night. God bless you all.
Been a pleasure.
Great work, everyone. The last one off was Nancy Massaro.
Do you know her?
Why am I not surprised? My
Oh, that was wonderful. It was wonderful. Really, really. Whew, I'm exhausted just listening to you.
I realized that I got behind. I talked so much about the first two themes that I was behind the purported, you know, I have a proportion there, but I caught up. I almost caught up. I was only about 8 minutes long.
It was
Very
great.
enjoyable.
It
You
was-
guys all
it was
did
wonderful.
great.
Very
It
good.
was wonderful. Yeah,
Yeah.
terrific.
Yes, and we have
So-
recordings of all three of your talks, Father Massaro. So if you want them, we can send them to you.
Yeah, well, just the YouTube link. Could you just put that on an email?
Yep, that sounds good. So I will make a note for Jillian to send that to you.
I have one question, Father. What happened to the Chat GPT test with your kids? Your
Yes,
students?
that's what I want to know.
Well, I think I told you, I